Recording. Okay. Okay, that's all set. All right, so I will call this meeting to order at 9:35 of the Cape Cod Public Purchasing Officials Association. Have we had a chance to review the minutes? I believe I sent it at the end of last week. Looking for someone to make a motion.
Jennifer, it's Amber Patterson. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from last meeting.
Thank you, Amber. And good morning. And do I have a second?
I have a second. Svetlana Salem, Town of Yarmouth.
Hi, Svetlana.
Good morning.
All approved. Anybody, if you oppose, you can always put it in the chat. Hearing none. Okay, so moved. Alrighty, so pretty easy. We're going to go right into our presentation. David Anthony from the town of Barnstable is here to talk about energy procurement. I'm glad that he agreed and is doing this presentation for us, because I'm going to be asking the towns, hopefully by today, to start getting our information for our fuel bids for fuel, gasoline, and diesel. So I figured a little bit more information about this commodity is probably good, so that we can make informed decisions of what we're going to be doing moving forward and how the market works, because it's, like I said, it's a really fun fun commodity to work with, very volatile market. So but I'm sure David will go into that. So whenever you're ready, you can take it away. I believe everybody can see his screen that's been shared. So
good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to present. For those of you who don't know me, 22 years of municipal procurement and experience in dealing with energy for the town of Barnstable. I spent 10 years in the private sector at Hartford Insurance before that. So I've got a pretty good handle on some procurement issues, some energy issues, and also contracting and negotiation. So what I wanted to do, and this slide deck will be available. I'll give it to Jen, and she can make it available to you so that it gives you just a little bit of a background. But what I wanted to do was kind of give a little bit of a background about the commodities of energy and some of the unique qualities of how they're procured specifically for us. I didn't want to give this broad, international kind of a presentation. I really wanted to gear this more towards the Cape and what we do and how we do it, so that we can keep this on point and hopefully get to discussions or questions at the end. So just as a brief overview here, and let me, okay. Here we go, now that I know how to drive. Typically, our energy is built around these commodities. This is the bulk of what we do. We buy electricity, we buy our heating fuels, which, depending on where you are on the Cape, could be natural gas, oil, or propane, and transportation fuels. And I know that we actually have a few people who still buy biodiesel and boat fuel, but the bulk of that is gasoline and diesel, and that is a tricky bid. So hopefully we'll be able to put some groundwork in place to help people understand that. Electricity is fairly easy. Most of us, if not all of us, are members of the Cape Light Compact, and we get our municipal electricity as a fixed price. For the electricity part, just as a matter of background, there are two parts to the invoice. There's the EverSource, which is the front page, and the commodity on the back page. We do not have the opportunity to bid out the front page. We are in EverSource territory, and that's where we get our delivery. The commodity, however, can be bid out after deregulation a little over 22 years ago. So what the compact does is they go out and they do a municipal bid for all of the electricity. And they generally will go out for 2 or 3 years with a base bid using Chapter 25A. And what will happen there is we will get a fixed price that stays in place as opposed to the standard residential or commercial prices for electricity, which fluctuate every 6 months through the Cape Light Compact program. The reason I know a little bit about this, I've been the board member for the town of Barnstable since 2006 on the Cape Light Compact, and I've actually participated in 4 different municipal RFPs and 3 regular RFPs for electricity. And I will tell you, those are some of the most boring presentations. 3 hours of listening to electric companies tell you how and why they make electricity and why the price is what it is, and it gets broken out to 5 points past the decimal. It is a pretty amazing market. But the other piece to our electricity, of course, for those towns lucky enough to have renewable installations is CVEC. And in many of those cases, we are buying electricity at a fixed reduced price, or we're getting cash out on those for some of the larger installations. We have a couple of installations in Barnstable at the airport, at our landfill, and those are all cash out projects. But we also have some solar that is behind the meter or is net metered out. So many times that will be part of an electricity platform as well. As we move into heating fuels, Cape used to be a lot more involved in heating oil. Number 4, which is considered heavy oil, and number 2, which is considered light oil. Number 2 oil is actually the kind of oil that you use in your residential oil burners. Number 4 is really heavy, nasty stuff. It's like molasses, and it actually needs propane in order to burn it. So all of the schools and all of the buildings in the town of Barnstable have been converted over to natural gas. There are other places on the Cape where natural gas is not as prevalent, or oil just still makes sense. Propane then is the third, and the reason why I'm skipping the natural gas is that that's a little more complicated. But propane just falls under a commodity of Chapter 30B. We tend to buy so little of it that you can just do a delivered supply, get your 3 quotes, and move forward with there. I don't recall the county ever bidding out propane as a fuel, but I do remember heating oil being a bid 15 years ago, and natural gas has not been bid out. I think everybody's kind of doing their own thing on natural gas, at least town of Barnstable is. But in essence, natural gas is actually built into 3 parts, and I have found an error in my presentation. It is not Eversource that provides us with natural gas. It is National Grid down here. However, the commodity is not Nextera either. I will have to update that slide and send that along. But your commodity generally will be from a supplier like Sprague or Direct or Hess or someone along those lines. So as I was saying, when we talk about the heating fuels, natural gas is built into 3 parts. And the reason why I bring this up is we can really only bid out 2 of those parts, the basis and the commodity. And like so many things that are out there, there's a language to energy. Basis is not a word that you would normally come across unless you're buying natural gas. And when you refer to things like the city gate is the edge of the national grid territory. But the reality is that the gas is in the ground, and it's usually in Pennsylvania where it's being fracked, or upstate New York, or it could be in Texas. There's a lot of natural gas out there, which is why the price is low. The problem is, how do you get it to where people actually need it, which is usually called the burner, which literally is the place where the fuel ignites and creates the steam or hot water or hot air in your building. So the 3 parts are basis, commodity, and local delivery. Local deliveries, National Grid, we can't bid that piece out. And it's exempted under Chapter 30B under one of the exemptions for a regulated utility. And I think that exemption exists to reflect the idea that National Grid and Eversource have territories that they control for those commodities. And it would not make any sense to go through the process of bidding out natural gas delivery, because the only bidder would be National Grid, and it's heavily regulated. So the 2 parts that we buy, the basis and the commodity, are billed in units. And typical One part of the industry refers to it as therms, and one part of the industry refers to it as CCF, or cubic feet. And they don't necessarily correlate. In fact, there's a rather complicated conversion between therms and CCF. And depending on whether or not it's summer or winter, you actually have the physics on natural gas of how warm it is, because as it expands, it fills the pipe differently when it's warmer than when it's cold. Really getting down into the weeds on that, but it's one of those odd things where if you're ever looking at a bill and the price seems to just be a penny off, or a couple of pennies here, a couple of pennies there, and you wonder, why am I getting this extra charge? There are explanations behind it, and I almost think they make it complicated on purpose. But the basis is literally paying for transportation through the pipes from Texas or Pennsylvania to that city gate. And in New England, we have a transport problem. Believe it or not, the reason natural gas is important to track is more for electricity than for heating. The bulk of the electricity that is created in New England is now made by natural gas, especially with plants like Pilgrim coming offline, nuclear power plants, and the coal-fired plants and the oil-fired plant in Sandwich moving to less and less of a profile. We're going to see a heavier reliance on natural gas to make electricity. And that creates a real problem in the winter, because you need natural gas for heating first, especially in New England. And what that does then is it limits the amount of natural gas that is out there and makes it more expensive to make electricity at these power plants. So you can see where there's a correlation seasonally on how natural gas will fluctuate, which is why we try to lock in the price for a period of time, over an entire year or over 2 years, so that we don't have to deal with the spikes of the cost and value of natural gas in winter. And then in the summer, we see electricity spike because of air conditioning, not so much for heat. So it's very interesting how weather can impact these. During Katrina, for example, or there was a one point a few winters ago where there's a daily spike that it went from $3 a unit to $14 or $15 a unit just in the space of a day, because it simply wasn't there in the pipes to be able to get to where it needed to be. And if you were on a float or a daily price on that particular day, you paid dearly. Which is another reason why, from a procurement standpoint, we constantly try to figure out ways to lock this in as best we can. So in a natural gas bid, if you were going to go out and bid out your natural gas, you would need to first identify your annual load. Now, I have to be honest, we have 68 meters in the town of Barnstable. That's school, that's airport, that's the town buildings, water pollution control. It was not always combined under one person, me. Schools did their own thing. Airport had its own contract. The town kind of did their thing through DPW. It was all over the place, and we weren't in a position to get those bids in line. And quite frankly, it took probably 6 or 7 years of arm twisting and cajoling and turnover in key positions in order to get it all pulled together. So now that we have it all together, it's fairly easy to keep track of, and it would be easier for us to go out and do that bid, because we can actually build a use profile of the annual load of all of our municipal meters. So once you go out to the market, and you want to you want to know, are we going to be able to go and lock in a price? There are a couple of misnomers out there. A lot of people think that if you go out to market with 30 meters, that you are going to be able to get a better price because you're buying a lot of natural gas. Quite frankly, the entire Cape, if we were to go out to bid and bid out all of our natural gas load of every single meter on the Cape, it would be a drop in the bucket compared to what some of the other contracts are. So we can't really leverage it from that standpoint. It really is a convenience bid where we can then turn to our finance directors and tell them how much things are going to cost. It makes it a little easier for us to manage it. There's that old procurement expression, if you can measure it, you can manage it. And I think this is one of those key indicators where if you can measure how much gas you use, it becomes a lot easier to lock in a price. And then the only variable that's left then is weather. And that's a tricky piece to this. So there are other options when it comes to natural gas. You can always float your natural gas supply through National Grid. They will provide you with the price. What they do is they set a monthly price. And they generally set the monthly price at the end of the month, and that's what you pay per unit for gas commodity for the next month. It's going to fluctuate, so it's a little harder to budget, but if you've got a very small account, might make sense to just let that float rather than clog it up on a bid for these tiny little meters, because then it becomes a paperwork challenge on the back room for the supplier, and many times you're paying for that incrementally. Power Options is one that has presented to CCAPPO in the past. They are kind of the Commonwealth's go-to for natural gas supply, and I think that there are some towns on the Cape that have used Power Options, and it is a convenient resource for them. There is also the opportunity for cooperative bidding, and for a while, back when Elaine was here, we did some natural gas bids, and that's actually where I kind of learned a lot of stuff, was by working with her on the natural gas bids and talking to suppliers. So that is also an option as we move forward. But this is a tricky bid, and there are a lot of things that are unknown about all of this. And lately, a lot of the brokers have been pushing price auctions. The problem with that is that the sale with a broker is, they say that they're doing it for free, but nobody works for free, as we all know. And generally what is happening is the markets themselves are paying the brokers. So instead of hiring a salesman to work for Direct Energy who sells you natural gas, a broker brings that our bid to Direct Energy, gets a price on our behalf, and they get fractions of a penny for everything that goes forward. The value and the amount that they're getting paid is transparent to us, but it is built into the price, which has raised some interesting issues at the state as to how to contract with brokers. And I know that the IG's office has put out some good information on some of their newsletters on how to do contracting with brokers. I think in all of this, knowledge is where we can figure out how to understand the language, can understand what the impacts are. And I had talked to Jen and to Amber about a couple of places where you can get some information just so that you start to understand things a little bit. This particular website that's up here, EIA, is really good. They have all different commodities, all different kinds of energy that's out there. They have really basic kind of energy 101 levels, kind of explain it to high school kids, which is a great place to start, believe it or not. It really gives you just a basic intro of things. The natural gas section is really, really good. It talks about where it comes from, the trends, the forecasts. Energy in the news is a critical piece, and many times they will link to that. Pack a lunch, though. It's a deep website, and it will consume an afternoon to go through it. But I really think that if you're going to be tasked with having to go out and buy energy, it's a great place to start because it really answers questions on all sorts of levels. And it's also a place where you can get really good data. The second piece of information that I would say if you were suddenly going to be tasked with this is Bloomberg.com. Bloomberg.com has an energy website, an energy window. And there are 4 prices that I look at daily. It is just part of my startup routine. It takes about 15 seconds. And what happens is if you do this on a daily basis, you will start to understand the ebb and flow of pricing. And these are the 4 items that I do. I will have a window. See on this next slide, I actually have a window and I kind of show how easy it is to just have this as a hot link on your web browser. You click on it, and you can see what the daily price is on some of these things. And it's going to fluctuate in every 15 minutes. So you'll start to see some of the trends. But I look at the NYMEX for crude, the NYMEX for Brent, the natural gas commodity price, and gasoline futures trading. And these are generally why. The crude oil price tells you what's going on domestically. It's generally based on a number of different crude oil blends, but it's how it's traded on NYMEX in the stock market. Brent is another type of oil that comes from the North Sea, and it's considered light and sweet, but as I said, it's not olive oil. It's good for transportation fuels, and that's why it's an important part of this, because Brent oil and the price fluctuations there key in to the transportation fuels market, while the crude oil tends to be more international across the board, and it tends to inform you if you are in the heating oil market. Natural gas is a spot market that's really important for the electric traders, but it also gives you a sense of where the trends are. And then gasoline futures is how Robert Dower, they would go, and if they're going to go and buy 290,000 gallons of gasoline as a result of our bid, they're going to lock in substantially all of that contract at a price and then ride it out for 12 months. So this is where you can get an indicator of where things will be. And this is just a snap from the website, so you can see there's a quick price indicator for crude, Brent, natural gas, and then the gasoline future. And this is from yesterday. The other thing to look for, believe it or not, events in the news are really, really important. Has anybody heard about a particular container ship that got sideways in the Suez Canal? That has had an impact on all sorts of markets, and it shows how fragile our economy is. Internationally, war economics. There was a major contract that was just signed between China and the Middle East for 25 years worth of crude oil that's going to go to help power China's economy. That's going to have huge repercussions down the road on the oil market. You need to take a look at national trends. Our former president opened up a lot of natural areas for future oil exploration, took down some of the EPA guidelines that made it easier for fuel traders to be able to sell their fuel, and that had an impact on price. Much the same way that our current president now is he's well versed in energy markets, but has talked about really taking on fracking, which is the process whereby natural gas is taken from stone under the ground in Pennsylvania. And there are some environmental concerns about that, which could very well lead to higher prices for natural gas down the road if, in fact, we can't get natural gas the way we have from there. So whoever is president at the time will have different policies that will affect different fuels. And certainly the pandemic has been a real player. You would think gasoline had a nosedive and it would have stayed flat, but gasoline prices are up right now as the market has corrected to keep the price high. I know that I'm not going anywhere and I'm not buying a lot of gas, so I'm saving that money, except that gas is much more expensive right now. So the other thing that I had mentioned was some of the local trends, pipelines into New England. As the new pipelines come on board, that's going to have an impact on price. Power plant closings, when Pilgrim went offline and goes offline, that's a huge tranche of low-cost, steady electricity that was the bottom of the market for us that kept our prices low. It doesn't mean we're using less. It just means we're not getting it from a nuclear power plant. So really, the only other factor that we kind of take for granted is the heating and cooling cycles and winter and summer and its impact on the cost of fuels and how we use it. So this is my contact information. I am absolutely available to talk to anyone, as I always have, and I would love to be able to engage further if you have specific questions. What I wanted to do was kind of do an illustration real quick that'll tee up kind of the discussion on our transportation fuel bid. Using this, if we look today, our pricing is $60 for crude, $64 for Brent, and $196 per unit for gasoline. Just 5 months ago, on November 1st, it was $37 a gallon or a barrel for crude, $39 for Brent, $2.95 a unit, so higher for natural gas, but we were about to enter the heating season, and it was $108 per unit for gasoline. So gasoline has pretty much doubled in its futures since November 1st. Now, the lowest point was March 30th of last year. That was when we saw the oil market get absolutely wonky, and there's no other official explanation for it. We actually saw oil trading in the negative territory for about a day. Because there was so much oil and there was no place for it to go, and there were literally ships that couldn't dock because there was no place to unload them. We're talking about huge international tankers that were scheduled to come into ports, and they just had to stay at sea, which had a huge backup. So on March 30th, crude was at $20 a barrel. The reason why I bring that up, and I checked this with Jen just before I came on board, when we locked in our transportation fuel on April 23rd of last year, crude was trading at $17 a barrel. Again, today it's at 60. Brent was trading at $22 a barrel. Today it's at 64. Natural gas was at $1.89, and today it's trading at $2.64. But the gasoline futures on the day we opened up the bids last year were at $73 a unit, as opposed to $196 today. The reason I say all that is, as we go out to bid for our transportation fuels, we need to be telling our finance directors who are starting to build budgets for FY22, we are not going to see flat pricing for gasoline and diesel. In fact, we could potentially see prices that are 2 to 3 times what some of you were able to lock in. You got a gift in FY21 because we were in the market at a good time. And for those of you who fixed priced, I recommended not to, and I have to eat my words because you guys made the right decision. By fixing the pricing in, you got a really good price for gasoline and diesel for this year, but that's not going to be the case for next year. So that being said, I've talked for about a half hour. I wanted to leave some time for questions and answers, and also have a discussion about the transportation bid. So I will take a sip of water and turn it back to Jen. And if there are any questions, I'd be more than willing to answer them.
Thank you so much for that. Are you able to unshare?
Yeah, that's what I'm going to try to do now. Let me see how I do this. Stop sharing. How about that?
There we go. Okay, so do we have any questions? That was a great presentation, and I really appreciate it because I remember last year we were kind of dealing with, and some of the towns may remember, last summer having to deal with Sprague and their requirement to kind of commit to a certain amount of fixed quantities. And as I told the towns last year, I can guarantee you, and I am no expert by any means in energy, and I told them, I can guarantee you, you're not going to see this pricing next year. And sure enough, if only I could predict lottery numbers this well. My goodness, it was just like, I was absolutely, for the first time, probably 1,000% right. But it's scary to see. I'm scared to see what the bids come in at this year, because I think everyone's going to get kind of a little bit of a sticker shock. But the good thing is that last year, most of the towns with fixed pricing also locked in their quantities. So they're probably going to have a lot of extra this year because we, again, had a mild winter. We're still kind of dealing with COVID. So I'm sure most of the schools weren't open to capacity, and vehicles probably weren't doing as much as work as maybe we did in previous years. I'm not sure what everybody kind of had going on this year. But it'll be interesting to see. But anybody have questions? You just might have to unmute yourself. You can type it in the chat if you don't want to. Lana said it was an amazing presentation. Thank you. You did do a great job. I'm now going to be going to those websites probably regularly for the next month at least and start looking at that for sure.
So not to scare off Amber and Kathleen from the town of Barnstable, but it looks like over the next year, we're going to be kind of transitioning more of the energy procurement to you folks, meaning Kathleen and Amber, only because I'm kind of getting pulled in some different directions by the town manager. But I think we'll build on that relationship and the experience. And I find the topic interesting in the sense that we so often turn on a light switch, we don't think about where the electricity is coming from, or we go to the gas station and we're busy with 100 other things and we don't think about a gallon of gas that's going into our car. If anybody wants to jump in, that's fine. But a couple of trends that are going forward. There have been a number of reports in the Wall Street Journal and New York Times by Shell and Exxon and companies like that, that oil has peaked, that we have seen the heyday of oil in the sense that you get countries like some of the Scandinavian countries that now have sold more electric vehicles. I think it was Norway or Sweden. They actually sold more electric vehicles than conventional combustion vehicles in their country. Now, they have a big, transportation system that's in there, so people don't necessarily need to drive cars. But just the trend is moving that way. And when we start to see Teslas and Tesla's coming down to a somewhat affordable price just as a standalone vehicle, never mind incentives, never mind tax breaks and things like that. When you start to see the Ford Motor Company taking their F-150, which is probably one of the most popular vehicles that's in the United States right now, and trying to figure out a way to make it electric, fully electric, that says something when Ford is dabbling. This isn't just some little company that is going to make 100,000 of them. You're talking about millions of vehicles, and I think we are moving in the direction of having to think about how transportation fuels are going to be acquired. It's going to be a while for the heavy trucks. Diesel is there for a reason. It does what it's supposed to do with a heavy 18-wheeler truck. But even in that realm, we're seeing people trying to deal with auto-driven vehicles, auto-driven trucks. You're starting to see electric or electric assist so that you can squeeze more miles out of a gallon of gas. And certainly the climate change agenda out there to try to clean our air has been given a boost because people aren't driving as much, so they're not using as much fuel. We're going to be challenged as municipalities on the Cape, especially because we're downwind from the rest of the country. That's the ironic thing, is that a coal-fired plant in Detroit actually creates mercury and sulfur dioxide here on the Cape. And I think that's going to be our challenge to have to deal with that. But I think we're going to see over the next 10 years a move away from transportation fuels as more and more of us are forced to, or incentivized to, move to electric vehicles, which is going to mean more natural gas-fired power plants in New England, or hydroelectric plants coming from Canada, power coming from there. And we're going to see a greater emphasis on natural gas and less on oil. And that's just a 10-year trend as we move forward. So I think it's one of those things to be aware of. It's not going to affect this year's bid, but it will have an effect somewhere down the road. So those are those longer term trends.
I'm curious, how many towns on the Cape have taken advantage of the incentive program of getting a couple of electric vehicles as part of their fleet? Do we have a few?
Oh, Barnstable has, for sure.
Yeah, nice.
Yarmouth has, yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to see more and more of those incentives coming out. And I know that, you know, Amber can speak to this. We go out for lease on our regulatory services vehicles or inspectional vehicles. And we purchased hybrids in the past. We don't have the charging infrastructure in place, but that's coming. We're currently looking at that. So I think that it's coming, and there's going to be opportunities for us to pick up a dozen vehicles. And once a full-size pickup comes out that actually works, I think we're going to see a lot of DPWs be able to turn to that. So.
Right. Because that's the buy-in right now, is that trying to get a facilities department to drive these little itty-bitty Nissan Leafs or BMWs. Like, where are they supposed to put their equipment? And I get it, and I understand it. So, and I think I saw a model of what they were going to come out with for the trucks, and I want to say it was Tesla, and it was the most hideous thing I think I've ever seen. It was awful.
Oh yeah.
So hopefully Ford comes out with something that's a little bit more aesthetically pleasing than Tesla did, and affordable, of course, because that's going to be the other thing. I'm just reading the comments. Yeah.
Yep.
OSD has a bid for larger vehicles that are flex fuel. That's a good question.
You know, I have to be honest. Amber has done such a nice job over at Barnstable. I have had the luxury of really not having to pay attention or follow any of that stuff. And really, that's a credit to her, and a credit to Joanna before her, because quite frankly, about 5 years ago, I stopped paying attention to a lot of the construction bids and things like that, and the goods and services bids, and really kind of just focused on property and energy. And that's really because we've got good people in the system. So I don't know, maybe Amber knows on that.
Amber, can you see that question in the chat from me?
Yeah, I don't know, but I contact Patricia at OSD on a fairly regular basis, so I can get an answer about that for you, Roby.
Perfect.
It's nice to see some of the names up there. Some I don't recognize, but some of them have been there for a while, and it's kind of nice to see.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions, comments?
What are you saying, David, that we're old? This is Roby.
Uh-oh.
Well, I got 22 years in, and I got a 9-year exit plan already in place. So yeah, I guess I'm getting old too. I'm one of the oldie foldies.
Well, I've got a little over 20 years here in the town of Yarmouth, and I don't see an exit plan anytime too soon, because I'm still having fun.
Well, that's always a good thing.
We're going through another reorg in Barnstable.
Are you?
Licensing is going to come under me. And I have a feeling that's one of the reasons why I think the energy stuff is going to continue to migrate to Amber and Kathleen.
Yeah.
We're trying to fix procedures and bring things more modern. And the one thing that COVID has taught us is that we need to get digital. It's also taught us that we can work remotely and be effective. I think in the old days, a year ago, we would have been sitting around a conference room. Now, granted, there'd be coffee and donuts, but
right.
But quite frankly, you know, the fact that all of us can tune in from wherever we are, and we don't have to worry about transportation to and from and losing time like that. The problem is that we don't get a chance to see each other anymore, which is.
I know. Everybody needs to buy more cameras. But it's funny that you mentioned that, because even before pre-COVID, when I first came on board, and I always wanted to, because it could take hours to get from one end to the other end of the Cape.
Yep.
Like, it's such a small area, but it's really not when you start driving. So for a lot of people, I'm sure it's a morning lost. It's a day lost in some cases if you have a meeting somewhere. So being able to tune in, that was something I always wanted to do from the beginning. And then seeing how, all these green incentives that the Cape wants to do, I'm like, this just makes sense. So I think COVID, again, horrible pandemic.
Yeah.
We all had to deal with it negatively, but there was a silver lining for sure. And it forced us to kind of get into this modern age and take advantage of the technology that we have. And I know me and my generation are very thrilled about it. So I have zero complaints when it comes to that. Although I do miss people. I do miss getting in a room and having the free coffee donuts for sure.
So just so that you can get on to other things then.
Yeah, sure.
I'm available. Obviously, I will work with Amber and Kathleen on our participation in the transportation fuel bid.
Yep.
I would imagine the town will probably wind up going fixed. So I think the language on having to have a hard amount of fuel that we're going to commit to is something to look into. I did look at the Franklin County bid that you sent over, and I actually have a couple of questions I want to run by our finance director, because we're going to have to make sure that we can carry fuel commitments across annual years.
Right.
And
I understand.
Yeah, that's the one thing. That's the one thing that I saw there. Certainly, if you underbid and you have the ability to lock into a floating fixed price. So if you need 100 and you bid 70,
yep,
but you've got a need for 30, if you can go float for the last couple of months, that'd be great to have in the contract too, because then, as I had mentioned, it's all about who carries the risk.
Right.
And if you're going to ask, if we're going to ask Noonan Brothers to carry the risk, there's going to be a risk premium in there.
Right.
So we want to get a pure price.
Exactly. No, absolutely. And I think I have a call tomorrow with Lower Pioneer Valley. So the way that they do it is they get pricing for both fixed and the variable. And then the participants decide, they have both numbers in front of them, and then they can decide from there what's more advantageous. The other thing that they have written into their language that I noticed Franklin did it is they could also, as far as the under usage. So if you end up using less, and if you have these gallons left over, any of the other participants in the Lower Valley contract, any of the other participants can grab those gallons, which is nice.
Yeah.
Because we actually worked that into our county one last year for anyone who still remembers the contract that we had to do with Sprague. So that was one of the clauses that we threw in there, is that and I had a couple of towns that said, we'll buy it. If there are any left over, we'll absolutely gladly take it. You had some towns that were like, oh, we don't want to commit. And then we had the other ones that were like, we'll take them. We'll take them all. Give it all to us. So I figured it would be a wash at the end. And I just wanted to keep everybody happy last year. That was my goal. But at least that way, if it's written in, we know who's going to have the financial risk. We know what our different options are, because at the end of the day, the vendor has to buy or commit to those quantities on their end on our behalf. So they don't want to take a hit. We don't want to take a hit. So how do we kind of blend the two and make, a win-win situation for everyone? So I guess at this point, unless we have any other questions, I'll just kind of quickly go through what my plan is for the next couple weeks, because I have kind of the second half of the annual bids for the county. I'm back to full time as of yesterday, so I've been, kind of rolling up the sleeves and getting everything ready to go. So the first one, obviously, that I'm going to tackle is the fuel bid and the gas and the diesel. So I'll be probably sending out sheets to all of the towns to start getting estimated quantities. I'll have dates of when that's due and when I'm planning on going out to bid for them. Same thing with the paper, water chemicals, which we do every year. And then one that we're doing this year that I haven't done with the county yet, but it's up for bid, is elevators. I think the town of Barnstable is a big one on that one, if I'm not mistaken. So if there's anyone that hasn't participated in any of those bids that wants to, I'm going to send out the CCAPPO newsletter like I kind of do after each meeting, just to kind of give everybody a follow-up of what we talked about today and kind of where we are with the bids. I'll be sure to do that and include that information. And I think that's it. Does anybody have questions, comments? I don't want to keep everybody from doing their regular job, so. I think we have to have coffee for everybody. We're gonna have to start figuring out a way to have it delivered. All right. Thanks, guys. Well, I will stop recording and I gotta make a motion. I will, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn our meeting. Like to make a motion? Amber, come on back.
Amber Sanderson, I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
You have a
I
second?
second that. This is Roby.
Oh, Roby, okay. Hopped on. All right, second, and going once, going twice. Thank you, guys. All right, so 10:21 officially. We have adjourned.
Thank you, Jen and David.